indeed, and thank you for the conference, really, for organising. If anybody's here from the organising committee, but thank you so much. It's nice to see familiar faces again and to be among friends, as it were. It's really nice. I've got lots to say, and I'll probably say it too quickly, so I apologise for that. We'll do what we can in the time we have. The nice thing is it connects very much with what was just said before. In fact, our colleague, I think, probably said it far better than I did, very effectively. I'm rather text-heavy when I talk in these sessions, so I say a lot of extra things, but I think the clarity that we had before will be really helpful to make sense of what we're doing. Here we are, the very quick plan of what we're talking about. I want to connect AI and what AI is doing to education, and doing to education is an interesting phrase in itself. I want to connect that with some of the things that the Common European Framework for Languages expects us to do as teachers in the classroom. One of the things that nowadays we're expected to do in the second edition of the framework is we're expected to help our students become social agents. It's quite tricky because at the moment things are happening, as we know, with the post-digital age that was mentioned a few moments ago, where things are very much mediated by digitalization in every way. Almost every single thing we do now has got a digital aspect. Even when you're talking face-to-face, there may be a computer on, you might stop for a moment to check your smartphone or whatever. Very few things are actually purely unmediated. This is really important. It means that in education, we are expected somehow to help our students deal with this post-digital world. Also, it means that some of the fundamental things that we think about education maybe are being challenged. One of them was mentioned before, where there is a two-tier system to ChatGPT or other chatbots, where if you don't pay, you get a different service. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as teachers, etc. There are also great promises made about what AI can do, as has been touched on already. But the thing is that we must always remember we are pivotal in this as language teachers, because all of this magic with chatbots is based on language. We are actually in a pivotal position, which is kind of nice, but frightening. Just to remind us, the Common European Framework says lots of things about language teaching. I think it's an admirable document. The companion document is really helpful, says lots of interesting things. It stresses new skills as well as the old skills. We as teachers should be systematic and organized, transparent, etc., all wonderful things we try and do. But also we should be helping our students mediate, being more skillful socially, and be plurilingual in our classes. The whole approach is meant to be social action oriented. We're trying to get our students to be more effective in society. We're also meant to be embodying the lifelong learning skills we want our students to gain. That's fine, it's very ambitious, but even more so when we think that in the meantime, AI has arrived, and we all know the figures, how in Italy, for example, ChatGPT, which is not the only chatbot by any means, but the explosion of use is really remarkable. We can't as teachers, thank you, we can't as teachers pretend this is not happening. I wanted to, 2 or 3 years ago, I wanted to put my head down and think, I'm pretty old, I'm sure this won't happen until I've retired. Well, we can't do that. Unfortunately, it's already going on and going on at a pace. We said the acceleration is very important. There are lots of tools available. The pace of change is very fast, etc. And it calls into question whether it's really worth learning languages anymore. And we've got a reduction in the Università of Ferrara of people applying to learn languages because DeepL can do it. It can translate everything. When you look online, Google will offer you a translation for everything. That's the danger, is it's very tempting to take the easy route out, as we mentioned a moment ago. That's not to say there are lots of great things we can do with AI in class. I've got a few little practical suggestions here, which I picked up. I didn't invent them myself. I picked them up from a classic edition of using ChatGPT in your class and what can you do. There are lots of things we can do. I'll sort of just mention a few to be a bit more concrete. When you write something, get DeepL to look at what you've written. It has a very good correction and suggestion function. Those suggestions and corrections actually can teach our students the stages of producing a good document. Some students tend not to do. They tend to do their homework, they've done it, and then they wait for their result. Instead, we need to train them to hone down a document, to perfect it, so you present yourself very well. And chatbots are really good for this. You can also use AI as a tutor, so when you want to learn about a new topic, you can go there first, and from there, hopefully, you can learn to use other sources and gradually learn about a topic. So project work fits with that perfectly. It's great for generating pros and cons for arguments for things. It can think of more than we can normally think of straight away. We know that chatbots in that way are more creative than we are in a superficial sense. They think of more stuff quicker than we do. It may be deceptive, but it's there. It's very good, of course, we said before, for personal repeated practice. We can have as many exercises as we want, or as many dialogues as we want to practice a particular structure, whatever. It's also getting much better at pragmatics, so it can show us the pragmatic choices we can make when we're in a shop or wherever we are, etc. And it can also produce synopses of books and things, or any text we put in. That could be dangerous, but it's a powerful function. We teachers also can use AI. One thing I would stress very strongly is you should never, in my opinion, use AI to produce a lesson plan, which I've seen a lot of people recommend. I think a lesson plan is you. It needs to be you. You need to be present in that plan, so you are present in the class. And when you put the work into, the work is the thinking that you go in beforehand, when you imagine what your class is like and what could be successful with the class or not. That thinking process engages you with the lesson, which I think is something that's really valuable. If instead you ask AI to do it, they'll give you a perfect plan, maybe in one sense, in terms of the content, but it's not yours. And I think there's a problem with that. We have to be careful. There are a lot of things we can do with AI. It can be a researcher for you. It can find suitable texts for you. It can generate questions or quizzes based on material in class. It can be really good for that. It's very good for producing grammatical explanations of a certain point of grammar. It might not be as good as us, but we can use it to check to make sure we're not missing something. We're not forgetting a certain example or whatever else. It can be very useful in that way. It also can draw better than I can. When I want to have a joke in a class, I draw something on the blackboard, and of course, it doesn't look at all like what I intended. And it's a cheap laugh. Instead, we can get AI to make visual representations of the material in class. It could be really useful. And also, of course, we mentioned assessment very briefly. Assessment, I think, is a huge issue, and I'm glad you mentioned it. But assessment, well, maybe AI can help us with creating those tools. We know that examinations now are very often produced with AI. So we as teachers need to be aware of that, maybe thinking along similar lines. But the point of all of these, both for students and for teachers, is that they're great opportunities, but we need to be skilled in how we use this AI, when we choose to use it, why we use it, and what the social effects are of using it. And there is always a social effect. The Common European Framework says that we should be modeling what our students should be doing socially. Well, if we model badly with an indiscriminate use of AI, that's a very powerful lesson for our students, and probably a very damaging one as well. Of course, we know that AI has got huge social implications, and not that much theoretical work has been done. That's probably because it's pretty new. It's fair enough that we're only at the beginning of understanding. First, we think, hey, we can use this tool for X, Y, and Z. That's great. Then we start to think, but wait a minute, when we use this tool, what does it actually do? What does it mean, etc.? I mentioned that life is very digitally mediated now, so it's not wrong to use AI. It's actually natural to use it. It's what happens in real life. But we need to re-examine a lot of our fundamental educational precepts. It really is important. I mentioned paywalls, and so there are different tiers to how much AI people have got access to. So the digital divide has got much bigger than it was 5 years ago, and it's a bit more kind of less obvious. It's a bit more hidden, which is very risky. But language is at the heart of this. We need to help our students to understand how AI actually works. So it's not a mystery. It's not a magic box, but instead it's something that we understand about. We know that it's statistical. That gives it great value, but also it has great weaknesses, as statistics do. So we need to be aware of that, to get our students to be aware of it, etc. Of course, we know about the dangers of AI. I don't want to spend too long on this, but we know there's a danger of bias and manipulation. The original sin of AI, I've called it, is that AI wants to get bigger, better, and faster all the time. Well, that's fine. Big is nice, but big is not necessarily valid. And we need to think of the value of what we're doing at all times and what's happening to AI. And there's a problem there. The original sin of AI is it always wants to grow and get faster. But that's not always a good thing. So we need to think about that very carefully. We as teachers are on the receiving end of those kind of developments, etc. And we hear sometimes in the newspaper about the new version of ChatGPT that accidentally did this or that or the other. We need to be aware of these things because they are warnings and they are important. There's another more dangerous aspect, which is what I call the doom loop of AI. AI works on language. It collects language. The data might not be broad enough. There might be a lot of it, but it might not be broad enough. And I think it is not broad enough at the moment. But secondly, also, AI will gradually be trained more on AI-produced text than anything else. And that's an infinite regression, potentially. It's very dangerous philosophically, but also in a practical sense. AI might be normative to how language changes in the future, because so much of AI will be produced based on AI-produced language, if I explain myself clearly. It's a really, really big issue, this, that we have to be aware of. That means we need to educate our students not to not use AI. We've already accepted, I think, AI is being used by our students, etc. But we need to teach students not just to work with AI, but to understand about AI. what it is, how it works, etc. We need to be aware, and our students need to be aware about jailbroken chatbots. So chatbots where it's quite easy to break the rules that are imposed and to get the chatbot to do something it's designed apparently not to do. We need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of the dark LLMs who work outside the normal internet, where their unique selling point is that they break the rules, etc. We've got to take responsibility here because it's notorious that the state is always very slow in limiting or controlling or regulating. It can't be nimble enough. It doesn't have the power. In fact, now most of the big AI companies are more powerful than some governments. They've got more money. They can control even the legal aspect of what happens. We need as teachers at the low level to have influence and control over what happens, or to take responsibility for what happens. We need, of course, our students need to be social media aware. We know that with the cyberbullying, etc. They now need to be AI aware as well. They need to know what's going on, the things it can do and the things it doesn't do so well. We mentioned a few hallucinations before. The map of Balta was great. That was really nice. But actually, the risk is that gradually hallucinations will become rarer and rarer as AI gets better and better at the imitation game. That's much more dangerous. When the hallucination is ridiculous, we laugh and we spot it. When instead it's super convincing and credible, then it's more insidious. So we have to be aware of that and be very careful about that. So these distortions might become more subtle, and that could really endanger the educational content of what's happening in class or what's happening out of class, etc. I also mentioned how this could influence the whole of language itself. We can also connect here with what I might call a crisis of truth. And of course, teachers, we deal with truth. We want to be authentic ourselves. We want to try and teach accurate grammar or accurate vocabulary, whatever, to our students. There's an element of truth in all this. There's a crisis of truth at the moment. We know about fake news and about conspiracy theories, but there's a different layer now. Grokkipedia, which our friend Elon Musk produced very recently, is pretty notorious because he specifically designed it as a competitor to Wikipedia, and the name kind of fits, and it's claimed to be politically different. It has a clear political intention to be, if you like, more right-wing in what it says. In other words, it claims to change the truth and to present an encyclopedic truth which has a strong political aim. That's pretty important. We need to know about that. We need to take responsibility for how we use those tools. They could be pretty good tools as long as we know how we're using them. So we have to be careful. The most important thing, which came out in the talk before as well, is technology is really risky when we become dependent upon it, and technology tends to create passivity. I was thinking when we got our second video recorder at home, not the first one. The first video recorder, you pressed a button, it recorded, it was easy. The second recorder, maybe 20 years later, was a really sexy video recorder. And so no one in the family could use it except my younger brother. We all said, can you record this, please? We became dependent upon him because we were passive with this new technology. It was very shiny, worked fantastically well when someone else did it. But we didn't have control. And we kind of relinquished control very quickly. We all do this. When something too new comes along, it's overwhelming, it's very fast, it's very impressive, it seems to know everything. All of these things are highly alienating, actually. And so they're really important in education, because if you're alienated, you don't learn so much, you're not involved, etc. One of the dangers now of AI is it's very good at pleasing the user. It's designed to please the user. It's very sycophantic, and that's now been identified as being a big problem because it can take people down a rabbit hole that's really dangerous, etc. So there's an issue there as well. But we have to really think about this because there's a fundamental emotional disconnect between how we really feel and then how the imitation emotions are being dealt with. It's a really dangerous disconnect because they can have very serious consequences. I'm going to go very quickly because I've got quite a few slides to show you that I want to try and get through as quick as I can. I think there's a few things we can do. We've talked about being, if you like, aware, tech savvy, or being good at using AI. There's things we can do. One, we should use much more than one chatbot. Most of us have one chatbot we use regularly. I tend to use DeepSeek. That's one I go to. But actually, there's no excuse for not using 4 chatbots every time you want to do something. They're really quick. They're almost instantaneous. It doesn't take very long. By comparing, we're going to get something better. And we're also thinking outside the process and evaluating the process, which is cognitively more valuable, etc. We can also ask the same question regularly over a period of time and see if things change, which is also significant. You should also change from your one go-to chatbot to another. There are new editions being produced all the time. We should be aware of which one is going to work best for us and not just stick with one. Brand loyalty is natural, but it's a problem, I think, in this way. What I'm talking about is dynamic use. Not passively accepting something, but dynamically changing what you do and doing what you want to. This means, and this comes to what you said before about evaluation and about assessment, it's a real problem because actually our receptive skills have become the vital thing. We need to be able to compare, contrast, analyze, understand, evaluate, sift lots of information, lots of text, etc. We need to be doing those things. These are really hard skills. We need to do them. The problem with these skills is they're very difficult to test. Any receptive skill is very hard to test theoretically. We all know that when you do comprehension tests, you feel a bit unhappy if you get the wrong answer to a multiple choice question, because it's not entirely clear why. This is going to be very tricky. It's a challenge for us, which I'm throwing down to you to think about. But this selection skill, the skill of selecting the right text and understanding it, is a social skill. It connects with being a social agent. You need to choose your friends well socially and choose what you say well. That's what you do in society. This selection procedure is actually a valuable thing to teach. And of course, when you select, it's highly cognitively valuable. The process of selection, of choosing a hierarchy, etc., is actually very good for memorization as well. So we get something from it too. One of the most important little bits of advice I have today is we should not just use AI in one language. Especially we as language teachers, we're aware of different languages. Why should we? With Wikipedia, I normally use Wikipedia in 2 or 3 languages when I look something up. And it's fascinating because not just is the text maybe different and much longer in one language to the other, that's kind of understandable. Even the pictures are different, which is really interesting in itself. So between the Italian Wikipedia and the kind of English version of Wikipedia, I see even different pictures on the same topic, which is fascinating. The point is those languages do impose a certain different way of looking at a question or a problem. The perspective is different. With AI, we should be not monolingual in using AI. Partly because if we are monolingual, it's almost increasing even more the general monolingual attitude in society, which I don't think is very helpful. And we as language teachers, of course, are interested in being as plurilingual as possible, etc. Very quickly to move on, it means that when we're in our classes and we're working with our students so they are socially active and not passive, it means we should get our students to ask themselves every time, why am I using AI now? What do I want from this? Which means that might select which one I use, but also, am I just using it to, thank you, am I just using it just to get my homework done as quickly as possible, which I think is a perfectly legitimate reason. Students are being honest when they say that themselves. But of course, that is an important thing, the choice of using AI, because at this moment, it's going to be linguistically helpful or helpful for achieving the task, or maybe even learning something, etc. In the same way, there's lots of things you can do in using AI. We just think, okay, use AI, it produces my text, and I've finished. That, again, is a very passive way of using it. Why not use it at the beginning to get lots of ideas? It's a great way of breaking the blank page syndrome. Yeah? Oh, what do I write? Which is really difficult. Get AI to get you thinking first. It could really help. But especially when you've done your essay, you could then compare it with what AI would do. And you can enrich the two, put them together, etc. You're taking a much more proactive attitude to what you're doing. It may also, another thing I want to mention to you is that some chatbots, most chatbots, offer a kind of commentary on what they're doing. DeepSeek do this very well. When you ask DeepSeek a fairly difficult question, they say, I'm thinking about this. He's asked me blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to do this. You get a whole commentary. It's about 4 or 5 paragraphs. And then it produces the answer, which contextualizes the answer, which is nice anyway. But also, it gives our students a model of how we should think about a question and construct an answer. It kind of shows you a way of navigating that moment of, this is a difficult question. What do I do? To actually producing the answer. It's kind of showing us a model of a way to proceed, which could be interesting in itself and useful. And we feel it's quite nice to be allowed into how it's thinking, which of course is a bit deceptive, but nonetheless, we feel quite motivated by this. Another thing that I really want to emphasize here is that chatbots are great for stories, and stories are great for learning, potentially. So we can really use them for stories. And here I want to make a point that we try to look for fact with AI, which is fundamentally mistaken. AI imitates, it copies. It's not the truth by definition. It's a data-driven truth, or statistical truth, not a real truth. It'll never be perfectly real in the particular because it's a generalization. So we shouldn't look for facts in AI. We should be looking for fiction. And fiction, we know we're doing it for fiction reasons. We're in control of what's going on, and we could then use it very beneficially, in my opinion. All of this comes down to having informed use rather than naive use of the different tools. Coming to my last kind of slide, this is a rather big one, or rather grammars. I've got 1 minute for this. It's a really big issue. If we want to have a resilient society, that society has to have diversity, and that means linguistic diversity. If you've got a problem, you've got 5 different languages to look at the problem, you might well get a more creative answer at the end. That resilience also comes from having a modular society where people do different things contributing to how society produces its security. If you put it all into AI and leave it to AI, and people are talking about this, especially politicians, that's hugely risky. It's a very unresilient society. It's very vulnerable. When where AI goes down or the internet goes down, suddenly you can't do anything. It's very disempowering. We must be aware of that because it's not a valid way of organizing society at all. Language is at the heart of this. Language gives us resilience because language gives us a way of looking at, analyzing, questioning, and correcting what's going on. So language is absolutely vital. Language, of course, is where culture happens to a large extent. And these new skills that the Common European Framework talks about, empowerment, empathy, critical thinking, are all exactly what we need to protect ourselves and our students against dependency on AI and instead be able to use AI in a beneficial way, because it does offer great things. It's a powerful tool, etc. It's allowing active participation. I've mentioned the word democracy there because we can't have a secure democracy if students are passive, weak, and dependent upon machines. Democracy implies participation. Dewey was the champion of this. And with this participation, we need our students ready to participate in that kind of world. They need to be able to debate, discuss, listen to other people, evaluate critically, etc., etc. If instead we're taken by the nose, as they say in Italian, then it means we are helpless and disempowered, and we probably will believe every conspiracy theory that's going. And that, of course, is a great risk to democracy, etc.
Thank you very much, Professor Chapman.